Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm working off of two screens right now. So I just want to make sure, and we don't have to spotlight my video. I'm looking at socialprotection.org on that one. But I did want to welcome everybody to this event. It is the big SP event. You spoke up, we listened, but what should we do next? My name is Zara Rizvi. I'm currently a consultant who works in the space of the intersection of humanitarian crises and social protection with a focus on cash transfers. And I'm your moderator for today. What we would like to do, because this is quite an interactive event that we're trying to put on, is of the 69 people who are here already, we would like you to let us know in the chat box who you are, where you're coming from, what agency are you representing, if any at all, and your interest in the event. So just be a nice way if you are able to just start introducing yourself. We get used to using the chat box. I wanted to just very, very quickly let people know what the format is going to look like. What we have is 7 amazing women who have agreed to come onto the panel, and they represent, government, a UN agency, NGOs, a local organization, donor, and we're really excited to have them here. We're going to give each of them 5 minutes to speak on the different topics, which I will introduce in a minute. And then what we're going to do is for the last 45 minutes, it's an hour and a half. So that'll be our first 45 minutes. And for the second 45 minutes, what we will do is open it up to everybody. So your mics will be open, your cameras, if you want them on, will be open as well. The chat function will be open, but we can talk more about how we'll run that discussion and what that will look like. So the introduction, which I do have written down over here. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. Here we go. So in the past 19 months, countries have been facing the challenge of adapting and leveraging social protection programs and systems for the COVID response. 1 year after the discussion held during the Turning the COVID-19 Crisis into an Opportunity, what's next for social protection? Ongoing efforts to make countries' social protection systems more responsive are still in place. In this context, actors from different sectors have been working hard to respond, recover, and build more effective and sustainable systems. Although their roles in this process have been marked with several advances, there is sometimes still a feeling of frustration and disappointment. Aiming to offer an inclusive space where these actors could simply let off steam about what really bothered and motivated them while working in the sector during COVID-19, the socialprotection.org platform created a forum, the event, and I think that's going to be posted so you all can see in the chat box. In this space, professionals had the chance to honestly and anonymously vent about their thoughts and difficulties in this period. Several interesting and thought-provoking discussions were shared in the forum. We took the posts, we put them out there on different platforms, and we asked the public to vote for the 5 posts that they would like to see further discussed. And thank you for those who did manage to vote. We took these top-rated discussions from the platform, and in collaboration with Space and NORCAP, and thank you Space and NORCAP for pushing this forward. And we also had other stakeholders who were involved in the process, a lot of independent consultants such as Larissa Pelham, Jackie Fries, who is here representing NORCAP in this right now, Valentina Barca representing Space. We have Maya Hamad and Charlotte Bilo from IPC-IG, Cecile Cherrier, good friend, and Anna Kondakjian from NORCAP. They all got together, decided to organize a follow-up live event to formalize the main ranting that we had, the main posts that were coming up, and to mark SP.org's 6th anniversary. I did not realize it was the 6th anniversary of socialprotection.org. Happy anniversary, guys. Thank you so much for everything that you do for us. That's brilliant. So today we have brought together our key stakeholders representing, as I said before, governments, the UN, donors, NGO, local organizations, humanitarians, to collectively reflect on the different and sometimes common challenges, such as the difficulties in strengthening the links between humanitarian and social protection responses, establishing cooperation among agencies, and committing to universality when we talk about social protection. Speakers have been asked to bring light to these blind spots and other discussions, and to have their own say about the possibilities to build forward better as a community. The socialprotection.org team is committed to creating more moments like this. And this is a first for them to have this kind of a collaborative discussion and space. This is not a formal webinar. There are no PowerPoints. None of that sort of stuff is happening. And really, we just wanted a formal dialogue. But also open it up to the audience. So we're really testing out the space, and we're going to see what this works like, how we can create a community of practice like this. But they have other sorts of events coming up. They have a design of a brand new platform for 2023, more details upcoming on that one. The next 3 webinars or events that they are hosting, one is on the 18th of November, and working as one on building social protection floors. All these links are going to be going into the chat box right now. Where next in digital social protection, and that's going to be on the 23rd of November. And then there's the Arab Ministerial Forum, which is taking place on the 30th of November. And because a while ago I was involved in the Arab Ministerial one, all of them are very cool webinars, but that one, go check it out, because they already have some discussion papers and things like that, and the framework and the guiding questions, and that looks super interesting. There are also podcasts. They have mini courses as well. And this is all around, services that they provide to us as a social protection community. I am going to stop there and stop reading from a script because that's not what we are here to do. What I will go ahead and do is ask my sp.org colleagues to put up the posts so that we can take a look and see what are the main sort of topic of conversation that we are going to get through today. And if we can go to the next slide, once we have the screen sharing. Yeah, so there was a bunch of different posts that were up there, and then we just took the top 5. So if we go ahead to the next one. So this was the 5th one. So we're going to work our way up with some suspense as to what was the top rated post. But I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anybody what the top rated post was. But, we have one around a false dichotomy between targeted and universal social protection. Like, why are we talking about these people are frustrated in terms of, they get into conversations with like, should it be targeted? Should it be universal? What does it mean? And we're going to ask our speakers to reflect a bit on that one. We are then going to, one of the things we also had posting on was local context and leadership as being key. And it was a super interesting one to look at the whole entire conversation and discussion happening on the forum on this, where governments often face severe budgetary constraints or are forced to make structural adjustments due to international loans. And there was some comments below this in terms of don't come in with preconceived solutions. How will governments fund social protection? Which countries have allocated enough of their GDP to this during COVID or even pre-COVID in some cases? We also had, and this has come up quite a bit since the beginning, I think, about the COVID response, that we do need to talk about the nexus. Where is it with humanitarian actors and social protection and those linkages? Are humanitarians merely being opportunistic and using the system where it suits them? So we do have speakers who will be able to talk about and address that, but I know this is a big topic of conversation otherwise also. We also have one around technocratic solutions versus relationships and being nice. For those of you who, and I do see quite a few people actually here who have been part of the informal hangouts that Cecile, Sherry, and myself started hosting after COVID, so that we had a community of practice and a space. There was a lot being said about, do we have, it's just technocratic solutions, but you need people on the ground who can be either diplomatic or enablers, facilitators. A lot of the issues, blockages, and challenges we have is actually around the politics of it. So just saying, there isn't just a technocratic solution around it. And then, drum roll, please, the top rated post, it's actually around coordination, competition, cooperation. And it was the topic really started out as somebody posting about, why can't the UN work as one? Where is that one UN agenda and what is happening? And there's so much competition. But below the comments and things, it was really just talking about coordination and competition, agencies thinking too much of how to promote their own agenda and status instead of working together on the country level. So that's the other one that we've asked our speakers to take a look at and to be able to reflect on a bit better. So with that, we wanted very much to keep the integrity of the posts there. We did try and organize them a little bit. We can get rid of the slides. And what I'm going to do is invite Marie-Rose to come on board right now. And maybe we should spotlight Marie-Rose's video. Maybe that's a better way of doing this. But Marie-Rose Romaine Murphy, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this forum, to this discussion. And thank you so much for taking the time. You are the co-founder and president of Espoir and the Foundation Communautaire Haitienne. In addition to being the president of your own management and strategy firm, community-led structural change is one of your passions. And again, really, and you're very, very active on Twitter. So if anybody's on Twitter, go ahead and follow Marie-Rose. You will get quite an interesting perspective. But we wanted to start off this discussion and conversation to hear your thoughts and reflections on the different posts, but also just working in the space, working with the local organization, having founded a local organization. Over to you, and you've got your 5 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Social Protection Network and ZERA for their invitation to join this panel. It's a pleasure and an honor. I also would like to thank my fellow panelists for the work that they do. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the growth of global inequality, and climate change is devastating global South countries in a way that seems to increase every year. I'm thankful for social protection programs that can provide much needed support to global South communities. Now that I've done my very positive and diplomatic bit, I will say that, however, as a global South leader, I have key concerns, and I cannot help to wish for more. What is more? Let me explain. After the 2010 Haiti earthquake, I worked with Haitian and international stakeholders to launch the Haiti Community Foundation, which is Haiti-led, Haiti-based, and community-centered. We intervene and evolve in the humanitarian, development, and philanthropy sectors, because what guides us is the needs of our communities and our commitment to meeting these needs in a comprehensive and sustainable manner. We work with and for communities. We say that we work with them tête ensemble, which means heads together. I can tell you that this is the key to effective and sustainable development. My concern when it comes to social protection is that programs are seldom designed by the communities that are intended for. Effective aid is one that is designed by communities who best know their needs and priorities. Otherwise, aid continues to foster dependency and maintains our current status quo of inequality. Case in point, cash programs have grown exponentially over the last 3 years, which is a great thing. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for cash programs. However, they have been increasingly controlled by UN agencies and large NGOs. Community leaders are not at the table, and programs that are being designed in Washington, Geneva, Boston, Brussels, London, etc., cannot address the reality and the intricacies of rural communities in Haiti, or for that matter, sub-Saharan Africa. This lack of alignment isn't just a source of ineffectiveness, but it is also a source of individual and collective disempowerment. In fact, one of my concerns as someone who's worked with such programs at times is that they are often too dismissive of local communities' concern and neglect to consider our priorities. You can give someone cash that will help her and her family on the short term, but when you do so in a way that strips her of her dignity, or in a way that questions her soul, you impair her development, and thus her family's development and our community's development. What I hope for is for all stakeholders to break down the silos that hinder our ability to collaborate and innovate and systematically work with local communities. We need to co-create development pathways and solutions to not just alleviate poverty, but to also work towards the eradication of poverty. What could it look like? Perhaps the integration and support of local programs, such as inexpensive and innovative health insurance programs, some of them I'm familiar with. Perhaps the endowment of local initiatives that build ecosystems and promote structural change, not just band-aid, structural change. The investment of bilateral funds in viable global South investment programs. That's something that, by the way, could create a solid return on investment, support programs on a longer term, and stimulate the economy. I believe that we can be creative if we break down the silos and frankly, let communities lead. The ultimate social protection program will be, frankly, a world that doesn't need social protection or aid for that matter. And even though it sounds like a pie in the sky, we need to imagine it in order to create it. As a Global South leader, I'm committed to working on solutions to not only meet people's needs, but also help them realize their dreams. Because dreams are really what fuel our hopes and keep us alive and walking towards a better future. I hope that we can all infuse more of our dreams into our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Rose, and that was perfectly 5 minutes. Really, really appreciate that. And, really starting us off correctly with talking about, things need to be people-centered. Can we look at co-creating solutions? Some of these solutions could be an investment, an endowment of local programs, looking at what kind of a return on investment we could be getting that and getting us to a place where we don't need aid. And you're talking from a very Haitian context as well. So, where we don't have that aid dependency, where we don't need aid, and we just have social protection, which is not a charity. It's not welfare. It's a right for people. And a lot of times that social protection is a community-led social protection. And just seeing, what can that look like? Where's the innovation around that? What can we do? And thank you so much for your remarks. And with that, I'm going to ask Yolanda Wright to come on board. Yolanda is the Global Director of Child Poverty, Climate and Urban at Save the Children. I'm going to guess that's international because now they're all just called international. Great. And has also worked for FCDO for over 20 years in various different roles. Her full bio is below there, but Yolanda, I know you have been coming out of COP26, and I think your mind's quite full around those sorts of things. So the floor is yours. And when you have about 2 minutes left, I'll just go like this. So keep your eyes out for me. And yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you, Marie-Rose. And I also want to appreciate how lovely it is to be on a panel of women and thank everybody for being here today. So I'm going to try and focus on 4 points that try to respond to some of those top 5 issues and maybe reinforce some of the points that Mary-Rose said, because I definitely believe that we should be working predominantly with local communities and on local concerns, and everything should be done in a way that works context specific, with those communities and for those communities. But as you said, I've just come out of COP26, and I think I'm just going to spend the first minute just reflecting on what the climate crisis on top of the COVID crisis is going to mean for the challenges that we face as a global community, but particularly for communities that are already experiencing inequality and discrimination, whether it's lower income countries or even within countries, the lower income communities. We know that COVID has really exacerbated those inequalities, and sadly that the climate crisis, which is not a future crisis, it's happening right now, is also exacerbating those inequalities. And those climate shocks, similar to COVID, happen to whole communities. It doesn't just affect one, it's not an idiosyncratic shock that just might affect one family who suddenly has to pay for one family member's ill health. This is something that will affect whole communities, and we do have to think about systematic ways to support those communities. And I was really struck at COP listening to all the vulnerable community speakers from around the world talking about how little money was really reaching local community level. That in Bangladesh, a study showed that individual poor households had already spent 10 times more on coping and adapting to climate shocks than the government had spent. So the burden is falling on individual households. And I think that's why, as a community that thinks about social protection, we need to think about how do we get money to individual households to support their own resilience and their own ability to cope and thrive, hopefully, under some circumstances. I do know that the climate crisis will mean that in some, it's not always possible to adapt. I really liked what Vanessa Nakate said, you can't adapt to starvation. And I do think there are some circumstances where, it's not all just about resilient livelihoods and small amounts of safety nets actually helping families. That can be really good in normal time, but the climate crisis is going to bring us some really big shocks. So I think one thing to say is, yes, absolutely, the climate crisis shows that we need to be covering more vulnerable people with social protection in any way possible. The second thing is, I think it really shows us this nexus issue has to be cracked, that we have to be trying to figure out how we move from constant emergency responses in some contexts into a more systematic approach. I worked in Somalia where, almost 6 monthly, you're doing another identification of vulnerable households and designing another emergency response. And really, it's much better. And now the government there is moving into a kind of social protection system design where, as I think many of us believe, a more universal approach is designed. Maybe it's categorical by old age pensions or categorical by children. Obviously, I would advocate for that, save the children. But, it doesn't even have to be affordable wise. You can start with a very small payment. You can start with under fives. You can start with just the most vulnerable districts. But once you start to, register people onto systems, create financial inclusion, then there is a safety net that can then be triggered for additional payments when shocks arise. So I absolutely think we need to be moving much more from these ongoing, repeated humanitarian responses into a more systematic approach. And in Somalia, where we have worked, we have devised some great community mechanisms, Mary-Rose, where local community groups make a decision about when to release some of the additional funds to support responses. So they're in the driving seat of, yes, we're going to draw down on our emergency funds for this. We want to and often act early ahead of an event, which is much more cost effective, more dignified. You're not waiting till people are in desperate situations, you're helping them to cope up front. So then I also wanted to touch on this universal, I see I've only got 20 seconds, the universal versus targeted approach. I think we should hopefully talk about this quite a lot. Save the Children does think ultimately universal systems are sensible, but for particular vulnerable groups such as children, such as the elderly, adult working people, women in the informal sector should be able to contribute to contributory schemes, but there are certain vulnerable groups that I think really make sense to move towards categorical and universal approaches. So, but I don't think it should be one the enemy of the other. There's ways in which we can move targeted systems into a more universal approach as it becomes more affordable. So I'm really happy to touch on that later. I'll stop now because I'm up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yolanda. And this sentence, you can't adapt to starvation. Resilience is one of the favorite words that people also like to use in our sector. Like, oh, wow, yes, the resilience of people. It's also an outdated word at this point in time. Like there is only so much resilience after, you cannot adapt to starvation. We need something else here. You cannot keep expecting people to remain resilient. Also, touching on the nexus, and you're right, we have to be able to crack this. And what does that look like? And, how do we break through those cycles of like the 6 monthly situation, but the community mechanisms that you're talking about, that makes a lot of sense. And building up the resilience at the community level or the ownership at the community level and looking at, these longer term sort of solutions towards cyclical shocks almost in a way.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that. And what I'm going to do is ask Catherine Tate to come up next. Catherine is the Global Director for Humanitarian Partnerships, Cash Voucher-Based Programming, and Disaster Management at World Vision International. She is also a key representative on the Collaborative Cash Delivery Network platform. I always forget if CCD is a platform. It's both. It's a platform and a network of INGOs and NGOs on cash delivery. You have spent over 20 years working in many, many, many different responses across the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, parts of Africa as well. And the floor is yours, Catherine, for the next 5 minutes. I'll go like this when you've got 2 left.
Thank you so much, Zara, and thank you. It's an honor to be on such a wonderful panel. And again, my appreciation, because this is fantastic to talk with so many very knowledgeable and experienced women to a big audience. I wanted to just dock on to where Marie-Rose has highlighted one big appeal, and this is where is the community in this, and how do we shift and actually maybe turn the system, the humanitarian development infrastructure that is existing currently, a bit more upside down, because we know that in many contexts, the last mile, the efficiency and effectiveness of delivery, and not only cash as one tool of the social protection toolbox, is inefficient, is deficient, doesn't reach the people that are eligible and most vulnerable. Many people do not know about their entitlements. Many people have to bribe their way onto beneficiary lists, which should not happen, as we know. And so I want to talk a bit about the aspect of what can we all do together to ensure that that shift happens, not only gradually, but more radically. One of the things we have experienced in the last couple of years is we've started to utilize in World Vision a tool that actually has been more utilized before in development contexts, which is a social accountability tool. It's called Citizen Voice Action. And it looks at constructive dialogue between communities that are affected, that are vulnerable, and that actually engage with local government representation, as well as national government representation and many other local partners, civil society, to look at what are the government's policies and commitments towards, for example, social protection. What are the entitlements, benefits? What are the criteria, and how is that actually delivered? Where are the gaps? And then they come up with kind of an audit, a social audit, looking through jointly, and not in a way that is accusing one or the other party of not doing their job. How can we solve the problem together? We've seen amazing results with that in Bangladesh, for example, just before COVID started. Over the course of a couple of years, there has been a massive, significant increase in awareness about the entitlement, the policy benefits that are open for people that are vulnerable. And that increase actually started from a baseline of 15% to actually 83% after a lot of these engagement meetings and action plans have been implemented. Actually, the benefit increase of these social protection transfers by the government for the people that previously were not included rose from 5% to 74%. So this is significant because it showcases that not only everyone can work together, and this is the actual goal of system strengthening, right? Humanitarian actors should not be there long term. They should go away. Governments should be in the driver's seat because it is the population that they're there to serve. And so I do believe that is one of the approaches that we've seen can work very fantastically in some contexts. In other contexts, like fragile contexts where there is a challenge, there's conflict, that also has to come with a do no harm approach, right? Where we look at what is the context situation, which actor has what kind of political economy and interest in this whole context, and work together. It is absolutely paramount, and this goes back to the point of coordination, competition, or cooperation, that we look at the different actors, in particular local civil society and local government, to take more center stage, and the people to take more center stage. There are many, many different ways of doing that. And we've seen that in particular, for example, the most vulnerable, like children, can be asked about what they know about entitlements, what they know about gaps, to understand better how we can actually feed back and include those that are most vulnerable. That's one point. The other point I wanted to highlight is the critical aspect of linking the coordination aspect. We're talking a lot in the cash space about cash working groups and the efficiency or the non-effectiveness of cash working groups at national level. In some contexts, cash working groups have linked up much more with so-called social protection working groups. And we know there is a need because each player has a different perspective on how to deliver assistance, whether it's short-term or longer term. These instruments have to be better aligned, but they can only be aligned if there is a central coordination body, and there is also the agreement on how to share data, how to share information. This brings me to another point which we find very critical in this space. If we're talking about anticipatory action that is effective, especially as Yolanda has highlighted with the dramatic scenarios we see with climate change and the impact of multiple complex crises on vulnerable communities, if we are not able to digitize information and efficiently look at the mapping, at the vulnerabilities that oscillate all the time, we will be lost in translation and we will not be fast enough to pre-position. But it also requires political will. And the other point, it requires sensitive action around data sharing, information management, and data protection. This is another piece where we can put people at the center. It is not about big machineries, big databases, whether it's UN or NGO or government. We know these databases need to work together, talk to each other. We need to jointly work together to complement information that is missing. But also the people whose data is used there need to be understanding not only how their data is used, but should actually be in control of how their data is being used and be able to also say, no, we do not want these aspects of our data being shared and utilized further. So these are some aspects I wanted to drop in, but obviously we know if we're not reaching children and putting the future generation at the center, whether it's child-sensitive social protection mechanisms or other aspects with climate change adaptation, we know that generation will always be there and accuse us of not having acted jointly with a consolidated effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And again, a theme that we're seeing over and over again is local communities, citizen accountability. How do we do that? How do we put people at the center? And yeah, at the end of the day, that is what social protection is about. That is what we are meant to be doing, not just with social protection, but also on the humanitarian action side, people at the center. And really interesting in terms of, talking about coordination as one of the problems. And we know it's one of the problems, but talking about, coming up with some sort of solutions and sort of digging into what the key challenges are. Yes, we need a central coordination body, but sitting in the middle of that is data and information. And these are, that is the new kind of currency out there. Whoever holds the data holds the power. I'm just going to not look for an answer right now, but sort of throw in already something maybe a little bit provocative. I'm not sure if it really is or should be, but we can talk about communities and local organizations as much as we want to. We still have a funding gap there. Until we don't fix that problem, this is all, it's a lot of rhetoric. We have been saying the same thing forever and ever and ever. So, where is the solutions around that? We can talk about supporting local communities. Again, until we do not get the money down to them, then, how are we actually going to make this happen? Thank you, Catherine. And with that, we are going to, and I also love all the ways in which we are talking about children and the next generation. It's why I had started working for UNICEF, which I'm not doing right now, but I had. And with that, I am super pleased to invite Natalia Winder-Rossi to give her remarks. Natalia, you are the Director of Social Policy and Social Protection at UNICEF at their headquarters. You've had a variety of different social protection, social policy roles with UNICEF. You were also with the FAO in Rome, leading their social policy team. And it is my pleasure to invite you, and totally realizing that the coordination cooperation question was very much UN centric and everybody wanting to be like, why isn't the UN working together? So we are 100% putting you on the spot. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here. Really love it that you're going to take this on. And yeah, the floor is yours. And I'll just go like this when you've got a 2-minute warning coming at you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I hope you all can hear me okay. Very excited to be here today and sharing the panel with so many social protection heroes and champions. And thanks for socialprotection.org that always are giving us the opportunity to have frank, constructive, and forward-looking discussions. I think I'll start by saying that I really felt very motivated by the debate and the much needed venting. Those that have worked with me know that it's important that we can put on the table the clear issues that are challenging our work, but also start thinking about, okay, what do we do with this and how will we move forward? There's so many things to comment, but I thought it was important to share my thoughts, and not necessarily my solution, but my thoughts around the challenges and complexities around working as one UN, which I know has been a big part of the discussion. Maybe I start by saying that this is not, unfortunately, a challenge only for social protection. All the sectors that we prioritize in the Agenda 2030 have a challenge around coordination, coherence. We all have agreed that working as systems, working in an integrated manner are the ways to go. But what does that mean in practice continues to be the main challenge. And until we get this right, I think that sometimes it's inevitable to have different perspectives, prioritize different entry points, have also different incentives for collaboration. I think for those agencies who have been working for a long time on social protection, we're really eager to make sure that we don't lose sight of the critical priorities and the long-standing principles, you know, the fight that we've been fighting for so many years. Well, also we need to be open to the new perspectives and the new perspectives and innovations that the new actors also bring in to the table. And that is not always an easy middle ground. We both need to be able to appreciate each other's contribution and acknowledge that if we're really committed to building systems, multi-sectoral systems, every agency and every actor has something very critical to play. I've been fortunate enough to be in part of 2 UN agencies with very different entry points, but at the end of the day, converging into we need to make sure that we address social protection as a right and the need to really make sure that we empower communities, the poorest of the poor, either starting from children and from the life cycle approach, while also taking into account the livelihoods perspective and working with urban and rural disparities. So it's important that we have that open mind and trying to make sure that we have we bring together different comparative advantages and strengths. I think it's also key to understand why that competition or lack of coordination happens. And this is not in any case a checklist, but from my experience, I've seen more competition where there's not a clear vision at a country level, where there is no, this is what as a government we want to do, and we are bringing UN agencies, multiple actors to help us move that forward. Where there are political commitments, but they are very high level and they're not linked with any form of action plan or budget allocation. Where there are limited resources and a lot of different funding mechanisms, and we're being pulled from different places and different donors, and we're trying to please that. And we forget that at the end of the day, what we need to do is to find the best way to make sure that a government is moving forward. Or where we think that because we have a specific global mandate, that is, who should, push a process instead of looking who's in the ground, who's being able to contribute the most, who is the one that understands the context, and how can we bring together those different perspectives. And also very much linked to what I think our previous colleagues have shared, when they're not effective platforms for active and effective participation, not just information or inform participants of what's going to happen, but actually make sure that they're co-creating with governments, with UN agencies, what we need to find out. I think there's definitely still a very long road, but I also think it's important to recognize that there's been some progress. And I'm not talking about, you know, the broader global structures, which I think are key. So we have, you know, we made as a community efforts to have a specific targets on Agenda 2030, and that was not one agency or two, it was a collective effort. We have structures like, you know, the USB 2030, the SPIAC-B, the SDG Fund, which its first window was on social protection. And again, that was as a result of a collective that understood that this was a priority that we need to jointly put on the table. And also what I think Catherine mentions of the different working groups that are happening at a country level that also are trying, not always successfully, but trying to bring the different actors together. But for me, even though those are critical progress elements, I think for me it's been very eye-opening that despite, you know, the challenges that we have and that we still to struggle to ensure that these global bodies have the ways to integrate different lenses, particularly from communities and country level, COVID has also allowed us to come together with common narratives. And even before COVID, there was a progressive alignment to voice common messages. The fact that many of us, UN agencies, IFI's community are talking about universality, it's a big deal. It was not happening 10 years ago, it's happening now. That we have differences on how to reach universality, yes, but that we're all committed that that's the way to go. That we came together in the context of a grand bargain discussion to say social protection, not just cash, social protection has a role to play in humanitarian action, and these systems need to be strengthened and enhanced in that direction. Again, that was not one agency or two, it was a collective really coming together to voice those critical priorities. And the same and 2 years ago in the Commission of the Status of Women, where we all came together as a collective saying, social protection contributes to gender equality and we need to do more and better to make sure that those results are there. And I think more recently, as we all are in different perspectives and discussions on what COVID have put on the table, we are all saying, and with our different nuances and different elements, that, you know, there is a challenge in coverage, particularly for children, women, and families. There's a challenge in informality. There's a challenges about fragmentation. There's a financing challenge. And yes, I understand that those are just broader global advocacy that we need to be better in translating them into coordination at country level. But I think it's important to acknowledge that there's been some progress, that there's been a collective voice. But now let's make sure that we translate that into things that make sense at country level. And that is where maybe linking a little bit to one of the questions. So don't come with, you know, self-made solutions or with very nice graphs and concepts on what works, but try to make sure that we have something that makes sense at country level. And I think that's what I think for a long time UNICEF has been trying to do, prioritizing field presence and knowledge of the field and trying to understand what's happening at country level, and to make sure that we have those structures that allow that to be the driving force of design and implementation.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
No.
Yeah.
I get excited about these things.
Yeah, it's all very, very exciting. Yes. And, you know, just talking about the comparative advantage that each agency is bringing. And again, this is why, I mean, it's crazy. It is completely insane to have a panel of 7 people, but we were just like, we need to make sure that, you know, everybody that we say needs to be in the room and has a comparative advantage is sitting here so that we have access to them as part of the discussion and just to hear those different perspectives. So thank you for saying that. And the clear vision at the country level, I've never heard it this clearly saying, yes, everybody says we should have this clear vision at the country level, but really breaking down where maybe this becomes an issue in terms of, you know, limited resources that are fighting the different agendas that are out there, the political commitments that maybe are not connected to budgets for whatever reason it might be. Also, you know, where you're saying that COVID has, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. We've actually come a really long way, and COVID has in fact accelerated, you know, what we are seeing with social protection. And the common narrative, I think, is one of the most important things that we have right now, and really busting this myth that social protection, social protection is a response tool. So how can the social protection and the humanitarian side definitely work better together? One of the big things is around, limited resources and funding flows and preconceived notions about what people should be coming in with and different agendas. Sigrid, that's literally how I'm going to introduce you into this topic. We love donors. And I just want to thank you, Sigrid, very much for being here. And I'm going to find your title, which is the thematic expert on forced displacement, migration, nexus, and social protection, sitting in the regional office in Nairobi for Africa for ECHO. That is a mouthful, but then you're covering a lot of different things. But you've done over 20 years of professional work with NGOs, the UN, World Bank, and obviously with ECHO. And with that, you've got your 5 minutes. I'll go like this for a 2-minute warning. If you can go like this to make sure I can see that you saw me, then that would be awesome. And over to you for the perspective.
Hello, everybody, and great to be able to be here and in such an interesting panel, and also having the right to be provocative and to really pick each other's brain. So thanks for that. And yes, I understand the frustration about humanitarian actors. It's true. Do we want to develop social protection systems? And yes, you're right. Honestly, it's a frustration because no, it's not part of our mandate. Let's be very clear. For us humanitarian actors, let's be clear, social protection is a means to an end. And the means to an end, it means we have our humanitarian mandate and we want to better respond and to crisis, respond to people's needs. So we are really people focused, and we look for the best option possible. So in some contexts we can work with social protection schemes, sometimes we cannot, or not much, let's say it like this. So that can be looking very frustrating, this question of nexus. And yes, we have a specific mandate, humanitarian principles. So we have a very specific niche, and sometimes we are getting the reproach of not working with, not funding directly governments, we are even being accused of being pro-rebels because we work with de facto authorities, de facto governments. We have dialogues with non-state armed actors. So what can we contribute? And what is interesting is, yes, we do a lot because we have this people-centered approach. So we have been doing a lot, even without noticing that, yes, we contribute to actually putting our fingers on dysfunctioning development systems. So we're putting actually our fingers many times on development crisis. We shouldn't even call them humanitarian crisis anymore. It's a crisis that concerns us all. So and also in terms of sectors, of course, all our sectors will intervene. We can link them up to human development. So yes, be it protection that can be linked to social care within social protection, be it the basic social services and user fee exemption, be it cash as that can be linked with direct social transfers. So there is a lot of opportunities. And yes, our humanitarian mandate, we can do a lot, and we have done a lot. So, for example, what is maybe in the most on program level? Yes, there was work on direct transfers, be it the routine systems, contributing to building them if they don't exist yet, or handing them over to development schemes, maybe funded by internationally funding, so not directly by governments, but then it can be also development donors' role to hand over to governments. It might not be within our possibilities as humanitarian actors. And we have a flexible funding mechanism, so actually we can pilot. And I think that's something that really we, in terms of added value and in terms of our really humanitarian niche, we try to do our best to explode it. And so we are building prototypes of approaches that are inclusive for less exclusion of certain population groups that then can be put at scale by development funding. And also in terms of, we have, for example, a crisis modifier, disaster preparedness, rapid response mechanism that actually can be models for emergency contingency funds at national level. So sometimes we don't explode it enough, but there is a lot of room for it. And also what is, of course, our added value is the the timeliness. So we have been contributing to actually tweaking national systems, social protection systems, to include some shock responsive mechanisms. So yes, and of course we have our focus on protection and do no harm. And that's so important because in many contexts, social protection is being instrumentalized by governments for or certain parts for other aims. And maybe especially in the COVID context, there was, for example, what we can say that in the beginning, ECHO didn't have dedicated funding. We were only funding health and epidemics, actually really epidemics prevention and response and logistics response. So what did we focus on? Of course, we tweaked our own tools, but also what we can say is that we focus a lot on advising our in-house, giving advice to in-house colleagues in the EU delegations on what they can do, how to include flexibility, how to expand their own system that they support with budget support, for example, at government level. And of course, still continuing the advocacy and also leveraging this development funding. Yes. And just to close, I don't deny that there's not a lot of challenges. We have to, what I still have to admit from ECHO side, it's clear, we still have mostly yearly funding. And that's a commitment as part of a great bargain that we're moving forward very slowly. So there is some piloting being done on the programmatic partnership approach, but there's other donors that say it clearly like this who are more advanced, let's say the Swedish or the UK, in terms of really not having this clear division between humanitarian and development funding anymore. And yes,
Sorry, go ahead. You can finish up. Yeah.
How much time is left? Sorry.
None. You are like a minute over.
Sorry. So what really is impacting very strongly is actually that we need to invest in our humanitarian partners a lot more, that they can do these assessments at national level, political economy, understanding political will, development engagement, and then really shape what can be the humanitarian niche. And that's what really we need to invest in the future.
Brilliant.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so
yes,
much.
I get very enthusiastic as well.
It's and we are, this is why I'm trying to like rush us through a little bit of this part, because we've got 2 more speakers left to go so that we can open up for the conversation and discussion. I think, you know, what you're talking about in terms of the funding mechanisms, and I actually had never thought about it this way before, and it's really excellent to hear looking at these prototypes that then can be used for development funding. Of course, that is, of course, that is one of the things that you guys do, you know, giving that pilot funding around it to be able to have that proof of concept kind of a thing, and then move on from there. So really, really interesting. And sometimes it's not just about the money, which is what I think people don't understand when dealing with donors. Sometimes it's the influencing power you have or the convening power you have. You know, donors are just as much partners as anybody else within this sector, within the work that we do. So thank you, Sigrid, for that. Our last 2 speakers are responsible for agencies that actually have to bring all of this together. Everybody's been talking about, you know, this panel of women and how incredible it is. And I'm trying to keep my attention really, really focused because I'm fangirling so hard, and having your moderator fall apart in the middle of a session is not the way to go. This is an introduction that I am going to make. That is a very personal introduction for me. Petrona Davies, welcome. You are I call you PS because you're the permanent, in my head, you will always be the permanent secretary for the Ministry of Health and Social Development. You are in special assignment right now as the social policy specialist for the Ministry of Health and Social Development for the government of the British Virgin Islands. You have over 20 years of experience. It might be 25, I can't remember, but yeah, 20 years of experience within the ministry itself or within government. And under your tenure in the BVI, You oversaw and got up and running the national health insurance system, which means everybody in the BVI actually has a number if they're working there, if they're residents over there, which is incredible. If anybody ever wants to think about a social protection information management system. I also am personally super grateful because you are the woman who is responsible for my sitting here right now. You were the first person who introduced me to social protection and really mentored me into it. And it was on my bucket list to be on a panel on this like this with you, and I can check that off. And thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours. I'm also going to go ahead and cut you off, but yeah, you've got 5 minutes and I'll go like this. P.S.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and hello to everyone. I have to say, I'm not particularly excited about following such a powerful speaker as Sigrid and all the other passionate ladies that spoke before me, but it's really an honor to share just a few thoughts from the perspective of a small Eastern Caribbean country. Now, many of you would be aware of the severe constraints facing the Caribbean, including heightened exposure to natural disasters and to economic shocks. So operating in such an environment where the entire population could experience significant setbacks within a matter of hours, it becomes rather imperative to foster local, regional, and international cooperation in order to mitigate risks. So to illustrate this, just permit me to reflect on the BVI's experience after being hit by 3 major events in 2017, excessive flooding, and 2 Category 5 hurricanes. So as you would imagine, the widespread damage to our infrastructure, the displacement of our residents, and the economic disruption overwhelmed the technical and financial capacity of our social protection and disaster management systems. And our initial focus was on search and rescue, emergency sheltering, in-kind relief, and needs assessment. And before too long, the international community did spring into action to support our efforts on the ground. And it became increasingly important to coordinate the work of a range of local and international actors, UN agencies, humanitarian actors, local NGOs, as well as new players such as international NGOs and charitable organizations, philanthropists, volunteers. Some of these people were well accustomed to working with the BVI. Some persons probably had never heard of us before. So to avoid mass confusion, we quickly organized regular joint briefings to promote information exchange and synergy among these actors. One interesting operational model that emerged was a financial assistance program delivered through a joint cash platform, which brought together DFID, UNICEF, BVI Red Cross, British Red Cross, CRS, ADRA, and together with government players or disaster management agencies, Ministry of Health and Social Development, to deliver multi-purpose cash grants using a single beneficiary list. And since that time, we've been working towards progressively strengthening our social protection system to become more fit for purpose in terms of inclusiveness and adequacy of coverage, in normal times, but especially also in terms of shock responsiveness. We've been looking at ways to build resilience at the household and community levels and to strengthen institutional capacity to better mitigate and respond to future shocks. So, for example, in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, the government has been able to deliver through its own systems an income support program that relies on the analysis, the tools, the technical skills, and the lessons drawn from the post-disaster household assistance program. Work continues towards finalizing our national social protection policy, and there are just 3 small points I'd like to make against that backdrop. As has been said, first, context does matter. So one size does not fit all, and we need to pay careful attention to the cultural and political sensitivities. And just to say that our cash platform could not have been successful if all the key parties hadn't been a part of the decision-making process from the outset and remain engaged throughout the process. Which brings me to the second point, which is the importance of engagement. in terms of its being fundamental to achieving a human rights-based social protection policy and actions to support it. So to be most effective when and where it matters most, our policy consultation and program design processes must give due consideration to the perspective of key internal as well as external partners. The legal and administrative instruments that will emerge from such a collaborative process that would embed the shared principles, because ultimately we all want to achieve the same things, I think will then be more fit for purpose and then would lead to more timely and effective responses to future shocks. And finally, why not social protection is the question that I think we need to be asking more. If we accept the premise that the state is ultimately the duty bearer in fulfilling people's right to social protection, I think it calls for a more broad, comprehensive perspective of what is in fact a social protection system, which goes beyond just social assistance. And from that standpoint, we should be considering how the humanitarian sector and other actors can add more value to achieve institutional cohesion and social protection capacity building within the specific country and regional context. I think working together, we can advance more rapidly towards universal coverage and shock responsiveness, which will ultimately be done to the benefit of all the people that we serve. So I think my time is up. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, PS, for those remarks. And, having seen the lessons and stuff that BVI was able to take from the 2017 program, which was quite supported from the outside. Yes, it was done jointly with the government, but then seeing how that was then taken on for the COVID expansion, that's pretty incredible. The government pretty much fully led on that and did it and went with it. But also going back to the point that Natalia was making in terms of, coordination at the country level and having to do that kind of a coordination and realizing in an emergency, like so many actors coming in and how important that is. And then this last point that you are very much making in terms of, what is a system, and it goes beyond social assistance. I think in the year and a half of COVID response, we've really, really concentrated so much on social assistance and forgotten there are other parts that exist within social protection. And, what can we do about that? What is that the next step? Is that where we need to maybe be focusing a lot more of our attention? And with that, I'm going to ask Madam Cecilia Mbaka to take the floor as our final speaker. Madam Mbaka is the head of the National Social Protection Secretariat for the government of Kenya. She brings over 25 years in government with different position, which has included actually your work in the design and implementation of cash transfer programs in Kenya. You have also been, when I was reading your bio, I love this because this is goals for me. You were awarded the state commendation of the Order of the Grand Warrior. And I think, again, given the kind of panel we have and having these kind of commendations on this August panel that we have, that's amazing. And I'd like to invite you as our last speaker to give your remarks.
Okay, thank you, Zara, and congratulations, sp.org. It has been very nice working with you as you mark the 6th anniversary. I would like to start with a post on global dynamics, because I feel there's a lot of talk on what should be happening and a lot of commitment at high levels, especially at global and regional levels. However, the issue is that the commitments countries make out there, whether it is internationally or locally, many times it do not translate into actions at country level. When we think about global dynamics, for me, it is the whole issue of moving commitments to action by having social protection at the top of the agenda of government. And having it at the top of the government agenda, it means especially setting aside a percentage of the GDP to go towards social protection. When I look at my country, only about 0.4% of the GDP is going towards the cash transfers. As practitioners, we have been lobbying for about 2% of the GDP, which has not happened. And this has even been complicated further by COVID-19 situations, which has increased the numbers of vulnerable people. Possibly it has doubled or tripled. On universality, and I think Kenya is moving towards this. This requires a lot of government commitment. When I look at universal social protection in my country, it is not an international agenda. When we launched the 70 plus, and we are in the 70 plus universal social protection, and we are in the process of rolling out a universal child benefit. In fact, we are currently piloting. They are all funded by the taxpayers. And this is very important for issues of sustainability. Whereas, and it is a fact that we are receiving technical assistance from development partners like World Food Program, like ILO, like UNICEF. We need to explore how we can progressively develop sustainable universal social protection programs so that, as I said, it can be sustainable, and sustainability can only be created by governments consistently and progressively supporting these programs. Additionally, on universality, universality needs a lot of resources to make it a reality, and this is a fact. However, we may need to look at a gradual realization of universality so that we can start with the most vulnerable populations, for example, rolling out a universal child benefit for 0 to 2 years, and increase this gradually until they are 18 years. And we can even expand regionally depending on where vulnerabilities are. Like when I look at my country, half of it is either arid or semi-arid lands. We can even decide this is where we are going to start on our universal programs, and then expand to other areas. So what I'm saying is that we need to move from commitment from governments to actions. We need to expand physical space at country level to ensure sustainability, as opposed to having development partners funding social protection programs. We also need to ensure we increase efficiency by developing systems that increase accountability to be able to stretch the limited resources to be able to cover more people. And this, for me, is what the development partners need to be funding, and not actually direct transfers. We also need to move towards universality as opposed to targeting, even if this means gradually, as I said. On post number 1, on lack of real UN delivering as one, the UN agencies and truly delivering as one under the overall leadership, in Kenya, the UN agencies are truly delivering as one under the overall leadership of the host government, which is a process that gets better when leaders are assigned specific roles and live up to the ideals of what delivering as one entails. I sit in a position where one of my core mandates is to coordinate stakeholders to ensure there is synergy in the way they are delivering social protection. And for me, I would want to say that issues of coordination are very complex. You're dealing with very many stakeholders. Bringing them together is not easy. And in Kenya, we have seen the UN working together and further together with the government. And I would want to say in a very good way, if not excellent. And I speak this as a lead for the Child and Social Protection Group of the 2018-2022 UNDAF, where I feel collaboration has been very good. And most outcome groups and working under UNDAF would want to emulate some of the things that we do. And I also feel that the social protection sector has significantly advanced compared to the last 5 to 10 years. And part of major milestones achieved within the said period have been through the joint collaboration of the UN system. And the fact that the UN has a team of highly qualified and knowledgeable team of local experts is a huge advantage for the sector where I belong. They understand the local context, the needs and their roles are augmented by the expertise brought in by the international experts who are also part of the broader outcome group. And I feel that whereas challenges related to agency-specific mandates may manifest themselves from time to time, I think for us, the government encourages the UN agencies to continue focusing on the big picture, and that is that of supporting the government to achieve what it would want to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Mbaka, for that. Just to have some real sort of truth bombs there in terms of, universality requires a lot. This is not something that is just going to happen, but we are looking at, progressive universality, the commitment to actions and being able to bring that together, but also giving a good example of, under government leadership and under a framework that, at least from where you are sitting, that the UN, at least, or different agencies are in fact delivering as one, and it is working over there. But again, it's coming back to the whole entire conversation, or at least the remarks that people have had in terms of, having one sort of coordination platform, one sort of coordination group, and that it does need to be government led as much as possible. We are now going to go ahead and open up so we can stop spotlighting just one human anymore. I think, because I can see myself on two screens and I think I'm still being spotlighted. We will open up for questions. So people can, if you want to turn on your camera, even if you are not asking a question, you can, so that we can see everybody, everybody can talk to each other. You can move your gallery, you can move your view to gallery, so that helps and works. I see no questions, which I find super surprising, but I also want to invite the different panelists, if you wanted to either respond to each other or bring up a point or bring up something that you had heard from each other's. Yeah, I see a raised hand. Adebukola, please go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you want to turn on your camera, you can. But yeah, go ahead. Introduce yourself, please. And then, yeah.
Okay, I try to put it on camera if you can see me.
I can, brilliant. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a person with disability from Nigeria, but I'm presently in the UK right now. I'm a Chevening scholar. I listened into the presentations, and I'm concerned that we haven't done much to speak about how these interventions take care of people with disabilities and and their concerns. We have seen that even the UN has talked about the fact that people with disabilities are most excluded, and COVID has made things even worse. So how can we begin to put these strategies together and raise more awareness, especially with social protection related COVID interventions?
Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to go ahead and take a couple of questions first and then open it up. Nupur, if you wanted to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. From New York, I'm Nupur, and I work on social protection in fragile and humanitarian contexts, and I work with UNICEF. I don't actually have a question. Thank you so much to the panel for lots of insights. I had a comment really, or something to share, not just on the panel, but also the whole exercise. I've been following the inputs that came from various people on various questions. Very familiar with some of those questions that you presented earlier. In general, I thought we should also celebrate some of the positive things that have happened. And if I look back at my own experience, 20 years back, were we even talking about humanitarian? I mean, yes, people were talking about it, but were there any systems or processes in place for humanitarian social protection to come together? decade or so. And just to highlight that to everybody, again, a big success that I see from my side is as a part of or as a co-lead of the Grand Bargain subgroup on linking humanitarian cash with social protection. There are a set of case studies that are collaboratively developed by a range of stakeholders, not talking of UN agencies alone here. You're talking of a range of stakeholders who came together to develop these case studies to look at different aspects of how humanitarian cash can link with social protection system building. Right from financing to coordination to targeting to delivery mechanism to grievance mechanisms and so on. So I will share those in the chat box. I'll share the link to that. But I wanted to bring this back, say that positive things have also happened, and we do work together also. So on that note, I will, go off the camera and.
Thank you, Nupur. I think it is important that, so much has been achieved as well, and I think P.S. Davies, you were also talking about it a little bit, where we have, conversations have been happening, etc., but we have indeed, in fact, moved forward. Charis, we'll have you come on next. And Florencia, if you just want to pop a note, are you happy to come in with your question, or do you want me to read it out loud? So Charis, over to you first.
Thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Charis. I work in social protection in Bangladesh. I think it's difficult to follow Nupur's positive comments, but I'm not sure if this is a question or maybe just a remark. I just think that we're talking about kind of coordination between development partners and different kind of stakeholders on this side, but I'm also thinking that for me, with my work in Bangladesh, it's kind of quite difficult in terms of coordination with government and the different government actors there. Particular for us, I think government has like really strong plans and commitments and strategies and budgets, but they're all held by the different agencies, so Finance Division and Cabinet Division and Ministry of Social Welfare, and then all the line ministries as well. And I think we struggle because the sector is fragmented, meaning that the kind of government leadership on that side is, although there are kind of committed actors in these different areas, there is not one kind of agency that has the ownership and can then drive it forward and coordinate everyone else. I'm not sure if it was a question, maybe it was just a remark.
No, but this is this is part of a conversation and discussion as well. They don't have to be questions. And in fact, I'm quite interested to hear from the audience, the question that we had from Ade Bukta in terms of, people with disabilities and the kind of work. I can see Yolanda has already posted some information around this and disability inclusion. I know there's quite a lot of work that is being done around disability inclusion, but other than the panelists, if there are people from this is about building a community of practice, it is not just the panelists who can bring forth the information, but if you have a way to answer this question and to add resources, it would be brilliant to be able to hear from you on that. Nupur, not Nupur, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. Florencia, will have you go first because you had put the question inside the chat box already. And then Carla, you're next. It's a lot of UNICEF people, so I do want to encourage others who don't work for UNICEF. If you work for UNICEF, it's fine, you can still speak, but would be great if we got lots of people speaking right now. I know we love our social protection at UNICEF, but there are others also. Florencia, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm sorry, I work for UNICEF as well, but
it's okay. It's okay. We still love you. Go ahead.
Thanks. So my question comes from, and I appreciate the words from every panelist. I do agree. I think it was Sigrid that put it forward that there's a clear difference in focus in humanitarian actors and social protection practitioners, and I totally agree. And having worked on this, let's say, shock responsive social protection and emergencies and social protection in different settings, I do feel that sometimes the choice is not as clear. Like, of course, when systems are not ready, you're not going to wait for systems to respond. But at the same time, there are often other factors that play in those decisions, and the shape in which funding comes is a factor that sometimes I felt, and having worked in Mozambique and now in Latin America in these kind of emergencies, plays a bigger role than it should. Or there could be more flexibility in how do we understand the lines are not as clear, and it might be more blurred now on what's an emergency and what's not. And I think we're only walking towards more of these blurred situations and interconnected emergencies. So my question is, what role do we have from our different positions, from UN, from communities, NGOs, and donors, to make sure funding mechanisms also understand realities of these emergencies and have some flexible ways of allowing us to work through systems when possible, empower governments and communities every time that's possible, and understand limitations when not. But many times funds come with short time spans, with sectoral only funding, with other type of I would say conditionalities in between brackets that do play a role on whether we can work through a channel or other. So that's my reflection. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I know that we have 10 minutes left to go. I know a couple of our panelists have a hard stop at 10:30, or sorry, I'm saying 10:30 because that's New York time, but at, within the next 10 minutes, which is totally fine. Carla, let's have you come on because I think you still have, go ahead.
Hi, thanks everyone. No, and also recognizing that I am working for UNICEF at the moment, but I'm also representing the Grand Bargain, social protection links, humanitarian cash links with social protection, and also have worked for different agencies as well. So if you want, I can be with the hat of WFP or UNHCR or CALP or IOM. But just to say, I think it's really been great what has been mentioned, and it's such a complex, so many different issues, right? Especially the ones that have just been mentioned about, for example, the challenges of short funding that we get for humanitarian action versus the work around development that needs more time, that needs relationship building, building trust, building a lot of the network. And a lot of the times as humanitarians, we're very short, a short period parachuted and deployed into countries to be able to do that. But I just wanted to share perhaps one, obviously building on all the positive things that Natalia and Nupur were mentioning as well, but just to say one key frustration for me after several years of working in the humanitarian response sector, and it speaks a little bit around something that I think was just mentioned earlier by Karis as well, around the fact that government coordination structures are very different from UN coordination structures, and we have a real challenge around this because at the UN level, our coordination structure does not become easily adaptable to the country government coordination structures, and that's a real challenge we have, the sectoral coordination. But one key frustration that I have found is that I have seen that it's really only at the cash working group level, and it really has been the cash discussion and implementing and scaling up cash that has brought a little bit more attention to the issue of engaging with governments and looking at how to link with social protection. And I see this just by having been a cash coordinator myself, having tried to speak to the RCO, for example, Resident Coordinator's Office, the humanitarian country teams, interagency coordinators, intersector. How come we're not thinking of that at that humanitarian leadership level? To be looking at entry points for social protection in a way that we can actually implement humanitarian responses in a more harmonized, in a more universal, in a more mainstreamed way, so we can get really the funding that we need to support people to do SRSP, shock responsive and adaptive social protection. And I just wanted to say it's really key that we take into account, and I think some of you have mentioned already, that COVID is going to be a trial run for all of us around the climate change, around what climate change will bring. It's really a test drive for all of us, I think, and I think that's quite exciting, but also quite daunting. But it also means why this conversation is so important. And I do think that also the other elements, which has obviously got nothing to do with us, but it's really about the people. Going back to the first speaker that spoke earlier to us, is that with social protection becoming recognized as a social human right, people will need to start demanding and electing governments that will prioritize social protection. And I think as UN and NGO agencies, we can also find ways to support that and to advocate for that, so that governments are seen as practically illegitimate from now on if they're not prioritizing that level of social protection schemes going forward. I'm sorry that was a lot, but it's just a really key sort of frustration and issue around this topic.
I think
for all the brilliant sheroes around here.
Yeah,
and
thank
men
you.
as well.
Thank you. I mean, this is what equity looks like, so I have zero issues with this. Ruby, Richard, Mohamedou, I totally see you guys, but I'm just going to, we had a lot of things that have just come up, so I just want to get through that first. Also, the amazing team at socialprotection.org said we can have 15 more minutes. Panelists, I understand if you have to leave, do not worry about it, but I'll go ahead and, because I know some of you have a hard stop in the next 5 minutes. So let me go ahead and just open up to the panelists. I mean, we have questions around disability, inclusion, budgets, and 2 questions around actually budgets. Karis was also talking about it. Florencia was also bringing up in terms of, you know, how can we do this? What can we look at? Carla's question around coordination, why, you know, this whole entire, why not looking at humanitarian senior leadership and bringing them in around the SRSP part of things. I also see some answers happening around the disability in the chat box. So it looks like Nepal Save the Children has quite a lot of things going on. Madam Mbaka, you mentioned as well that there are things in Kenya, and they're one of the groups that you're definitely working with. I do know from the BVI government side as well, there's things that are happening there also. But I wanted to just quickly look at, I'm looking for unmuted mics from the panelists if they wanted to come in quickly. Natalia, I know you absolutely have to leave, so if you wanted to, if there's any sort of last reflections, thoughts, reflections on the questions that have even come up.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. I'm sorry that yes, I do have to leave in 4 minutes. Maybe a couple of things on financing, and I think that is one of the biggest gaps that we have right now. And I want to, I think, maybe bring our discussion back to maybe what Cecilia and our colleagues from the government were saying, that it's okay that we have a strategy, it's okay we have a vision, but we don't have the right incentives at country level for different actors to come together. It will be very difficult. And unfortunately, in many cases, those incentives are linked with budget allocations. So if we want different ministries and sectors to be able to contribute to poverty reduction, to social protection, it's not going to happen just because we think it's important. It's going to happen because they also see that it contributes to their sectoral outcomes, to their sectoral ways of working. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face. Maybe it's easier for social ministries, health, education, but we go to others, education, I don't know, broader, agriculture, others, it becomes much more of a difficult and in some cases I've seen also a division of labor. No, you take care of the poor and we take care of the economically able. And I think COVID has thankfully started to change a little bit of that narrative. The social protection is not only, it's definitely critical for the extreme poor, but it's not only, it's also a very important element for everybody, for the middle class, for the middle, for those that are working, and trying to bring that stronger narrative together to also influence how the budgets are allocated and how those incentives are getting placed. So the fact that countries, even low income countries, are prioritizing those budgets is also a testament that it's not just about fiscal space, but about political commitment and where's those big priorities are put in place at country level. So it's not just a privilege for high income countries, but for countries that are seriously committed to making sure that they have a change in terms of economic inclusion. So as this is my last word, thank you so much really for this discussion. And I wish we have more of this Shiro's exchanges soon. Thanks, Shara, for the great moderation.
Thank you. And Sigrid, I know you also have to leave in the next 3 minutes. Or 2 minutes. So is there any, you have been very generously answering questions in the chat box as well, but is there any sort of last words from you that you wanted to bring up?
Maybe what we can say on the humanitarian mandate and insisting on red lines and also data protection. I think it's very important not to forget it, because Nexus doesn't mean that we now do everybody does everything. It's very clear. Nexus are actually rules of the game for the different actors that act around a family, a household, a community. So we have, as all the interveners, actors, external actors, we have to respect these rules. And it doesn't mean that from now on, I have to act like a development donor who's doing budget support to the government. No. And I think this is really important to say, because even though I really regret that we don't have more bridges even inside the house of the EU, I think it's still important that we see, okay, we come in when there is really disruption of service delivery, and then we look into what we can do to ensure some continuity of service delivery between the different actors. And that's there's conflict settings where none of our development colleagues can come in. So let's focus on these, because that's where we also need a special expertise. So yeah, thanks for all the questions, and great to be with you all.
Thank you so much. Excuse me. Madam Mbaka, and my phone has 10% battery left. Madam Mbaka, there's a couple of different questions that are also coming up around the political economy of social protection in countries like Kenya with sustained multi-party electoral competition. Wouldn't social protection naturally command a significant portion of the national budget based on electoral pressures? For example, South Africa, Botswana, where it's higher as a percentage of GDP. And also, because that's quite a specific question around Kenya from Richard Morgan, but also just any final sort of thoughts and reflections. I'm just going to go through each speaker as a wrap-up situation and see where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you, Zara. I think what I forgot to say is that in most cases, when leaders are going to the polls, we shall see a lot of commitments on the things that they would want to do. But when they get to office, then we do not see this translate into allocation of resources, because you see resources being diverted to so many other initiatives, but not social protection. And I think this is what is happening what is happening in many countries. So I think it's really about continuing to advocate. And when we say advocating, I think we need to look at ourselves as stakeholders in the social protection sector and lobby governments to continue allocating these resources. Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant.
I also wanted to comment on the issue of strengthening coordination in humanitarian situations. One of the speakers spoke to different government structures and spoke to different structures of the UN and the government. And for me, I think there are not two ways. Both the government and partners have to work together on these. And I think when you think of government, it can be very amorphous. And so we need to identify individuals that we can work with to drive our agenda, so that we're not just speaking of government, but we're speaking of individuals. Because when I look at where I sit and the kind of collaboration that we have with the UN, it is about an individual collabo that we have created, and that's what that has made that succeed. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So are you saying that it is individuals who sometimes end up driving this instead of actual agencies and mandates? Madam Mbaka?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. I was putting my earphones.
Oh, sorry. No, and I was saying, like, is it because, are you saying then it does come down to individuals sometimes rather than an agency or a mandate? And
yes.
Yeah.
I think strengthening collaboration with the contact person in the humanitarian sector, whether it is at the UN or as government, is very important. That is what will move things, and not just thinking of government as one huge thing. Yeah.
I think, yes, no, I would 100% agree with that. A lot of things are make or break when that happens. I'm looking at the other panelists, and Ruby Khan from Save the Children, thank you so much for typing in your question, because you're right, we're not going to have time to bring you on. But along with disability and inclusion, she's also making the point about gender and inclusion, and that it is gender is not, that gender should not be an add-on or an afterthought, and it must be deliberate in the program design. So I just want to keep that in the heads of people as I look around to the panelists and want to see who wants to come in next to sort of make their final remarks and make any sort of response to the different questions and things that are out there. I'm looking to see if anybody or which one will. You're all going to do final remarks. Catherine? As you can see, I have zero issues calling on people.
Thank you.
But yes, please. Yeah.
Very quick, a very quick statement. I do think we've touched on a lot of different aspects that are very critical, but I would like to highlight one aspect that Marie-Rose also highlighted at the beginning. Social protection is not just the big national social programs, safety net schemes, the World Bank investments and whatnot. It also has a big component that often is really overlooked, and I would wish we make it much more visual and we actually elevate it out of the hidden space, which is the informal social safety net interventions that actually community members support, strengthen, and many local CSOs and NGOs, but also other actors, including actually private sector, contribute to that. That is savings groups, for example, community and village savings groups, a very critical aspect we've seen as a fallback mechanism for COVID-19 impact mitigation, where actually the big mechanisms and the big schemes did not reach. So one of the key aspects I would really wish is if we're looking at a more centralized, or whatever we want to call it, coordination body, at least at national level, where different stakeholders come together. This needs to be also at the front and center because it's an essential backbone, especially in fragile contexts where many others cannot reach among all of us stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, it's Marie-Rose, if I can call on you for, your last sort of thoughts, any comments on the comments and questions that have been made so far.
I want to build on what Katrina said and stress the fact that this is a complex environment, and most of the time, civil society organizations, local organization, national organization, de facto, shouldering the burden of social protection, especially in fragile settings. And unfortunately, we don't have a seat at the table when it comes to shaping the social protection programs, which I feel there should be. And to be honest with you, I think if you ask many local organizations in the Global South, what is social protection, they will say, what is that? And that is, again, something that I want to stress in terms of communicating, people just being careful about jargon and communicating, what they're all about, and making sure that we explain ourselves, that people explain themselves. The last thing that I want to say is that I hear people when they talk about, what is positive, and I try to start on a very positive note. At the same time, I feel like if we need to create structural change, we need to do better, and we cannot settle. So this is not about griping, but it's about taking a reality, just having a reality check and saying, what can we do better? Where can we get with that? And how can we make sure that communities are at the heart of what we're doing and that they're able to take the lead? And right now, I mean, as far as I'm very grateful for all of this, and thank you for including me, but I will have to say that in many Global South contexts, not just my country, because I work in other places, I am not seeing it. I'm not seeing the inclusion.
Yeah, and it's we can say all we want to say about it, but, and I believe it was Madam Mbaka was also talking about, commitments to action. What does that look like at the end of the day?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Marie-Rose, for that and for being here. I think that was absolutely amazing. My battery might die, but Jackie will be here. But Yolanda, any final thoughts, reflections, words from you, please?
Just very briefly, I think some really important points here. I do I think that some great points were made about people power, and we have, every time I've ever worked on humanitarian response, we always think the international community is doing it. It's a fraction of what local people are doing for each other and the social capital that is supporting local communities. So whatever the national government or the international community do has to support and reinforce what is really the fundamental way in which people support each other. So I think any ways in which we design humanitarian responses or social protection schemes absolutely have to be grounded. And that's when you bring in, you make sure that you're gender sensitive. If you're doing a cash grant for the caregiver of children, you need to understand what are the gender dynamics. If the caregivers are predominantly women, what things do you need to put in place to make sure that that doesn't do any harm, the women being targeted in the family. And I think often some of these targeted approaches actually exacerbate community conflict. I remember a study last year where villages in Malawi were saying, why are they targeting this family, not mine? We're all poor here, So that's part of the reason why I think the universal systems can be quite beneficial, because it's a universal approach, everyone gets it. And then there is less stigma and less tensions created. But I do think things like disability inclusion must be more than tokenistic. I totally agree. And we strongly advocate for much higher benefits for families with persons with disabilities. We know they have much bigger barriers to economic inclusion, etc. So there's some really great points made by others. I hope those are a few little sort of reinforcement points. But thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to everyone today. Really interesting panel. Thank you.
Thank you. And socialprotection.org will be doing a wrap-up, write-up of this and stuff like that. So we will have that. And last but not least, and do I have this correct? It is, P.S. Davies, over to you for any final thoughts, reflections, please.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and to everyone. This has really been a very stimulating and informative discussion. So just to briefly, again, emphasize what governments are doing and can be doing to move this forward. So policy cohesion, I heard a bit about that, the need to coordinate across sectors, again, looking at social protection systems, safeguarding against risk throughout the life cycle and moving beyond discussions focused solely on social assistance or cash. And as part of that, putting in place formal coordination mechanisms. And we want to make sure that in doing so, all the key actors are engaged, not least of which, as we've been saying, the community, and not just a homogeneous bunch, but looking at women and persons with disabilities and migrants and persons in remote areas, etc., finding ways to engage them from the start in terms of designing what this universal social protection system can look like. And then, of course, where states are not able to fulfill their commitments and other actors are required to provide support, to do that in a way that leaves the state better off, so that we're not just depleting resources towards a particular project and then that's the end of it, but we build capacity so that progressively we can achieve what it is that we're ultimately trying to achieve together. So thank you so much again for this opportunity. I look forward to working together on some of these solutions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say there are 2 questions that we have asked in the chat box in terms of, what do participants who came here, we're looking for feedback. It was an experimental thing that we tried. I think it was amazing that socialprotection.org went with the idea and we sort of did it. And I really, really, really want to thank the panelists. I know we ran out of time. We knew that was going to happen, but we did manage to get, a sort of discussion going, and it's the feedback that socialprotection.org is looking for right now in terms of do you want to see more events like this? What would they look like? How do you want to change them? How do you want to not change them? Whatever it might be. So please do provide us with your feedback. And I want to really thank actually socialprotection.org. It was an idea that it wasn't me, but a bunch of people came to them with it and they ran with it. Also, happy birthday and a special thank you to Marina Carvalho and Paula, who have been doing so much for us in the background. Really, really appreciate it. And I think with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap up. I'm sorry we didn't have as much conversation as we wanted. We would have loved to have, audience participation here, but we needed to make sure that as many people as possible that could talk. We hope we got you in, and we will see you next time. Thank you from me, and have a good evening, rest of the day, wherever everybody is. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
It was
Bye.
good. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
I'm glad
Thank
you liked it. I'm glad you liked it.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was
Take
very
care.
good.
Yay.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, good. Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye.